This video is supported by Galder's Gazetteer, a 5e expansion for advanced players.
I'm just going to come out and say it. I think Arcane is a masterpiece. Not only was it my favorite piece of media for the year, but I think it can pretty easily claim the title of best piece of narrative media ever to come out of a video game. Castlevania and The Witcher are good, but Arcane is great. And there is a lot that Dungeon Masters can learn from it. About factions and world building, constructing tragedy, and having compelling character moments come out through combat. But this video is about lessons we can learn from Arcane about how to introduce villains. Villains are the centerpiece of your campaign. They provide the opposition to the player characters, and interdicting their evil goals provides the opportunity to be heroic. In traditional media, the protagonist is the character the writer tends to care the most about. However, in RPGs, the players take on the role of the protagonist. So it's the antagonist of the one the writer, the dungeon master, tends to care the most about. They put the most thought into their character, the most thought into their actions. And as DMs, I feel like we can't help but have our villains personify the inexorable sin in our own hearts. Consequently, we really want our players to think the villains are cool. And like in real life, you only get one chance to make a first impression, so you have to make it count. I've identified 4 techniques that Arcane uses to introduce the numerous antagonists in the series. The first 3 are sort of general writing tips that could apply if you wanted to be a novelist or a screenwriter, but the 4th one is the one I really think will take your dungeon mastering skills to the next level. What we're going to do is look at the first 3 techniques and how Arcane uses them to introduce the first 3 antagonists. And then we're going to look at the 4th technique and the 4th baddie. But before we dive in, I do want to note that lists like this are pretty arbitrary. There's more than one way to skin a cat. But having a nice ordered structure like this not only helps make a YouTube video that isn't long and rambling, but also helps you, the audience, retain the information. So without further ado, whenever Arcane introduces a villain, they show 3 things along with them. They give context, which shows the villain in relation to the society and the other characters. This is how you ground the villain in the fictional world. They give the villain some flavor. This is what style the villain they are and their personality. What unique characteristics are going to make this villain memorable? They show the villain's motivation, which are logical and, in most cases, pretty sympathetic. Typically, it's a selfish failure on the villain's part to recognize the difference between what they want and what they actually need. So there we have it. Context, flavor, motivation. Now let's dive into the first 2 episodes of Arcane and see how those things are applied. The Enforcers are the first antagonists we meet, and they set the stage for everything that follows. For context, in the very opening sequence we are shown who the Enforcers are. Violent oppressors who are the source of our protagonist's deepest suffering. Their presence in relation to our heroes helps set the genre of the story. Punk. Fighting to protect your loved ones against a cruel and oppressive society. In terms of flavor, for the most part, the Enforcers are these faceless, nameless actors. Like stormtroopers or ordinators, they wear masks to enhance their lack of individuality. They represent the anonymous forces of systemic oppression. As much as they have personality, contempt for the citizens of Zoran seems to be the defining feature. Even the air they breathe is beneath them. For motivation, they exist to uphold the status quo, to keep the lives of Piltover's elite comfy, and they're willing to use wanton, callous violence to achieve it.
If I don't put someone behind bars tonight, the next time I come down here, I'll have an army of enforcers with me. We both know how that'll go.
Even Grayson, who shows no outright malice or hostility, unlike Marcus, is still an active participant in this harmful system. She might not do evil to Vander on a personal level, but her devotion to upholding the subjugation of the Undercity makes her evil on a societal level. Deckard is one of those characters I wish we got to spend more time with. His context is he is shown as another urchin from the Undercity, who is familiar with life as a street rat. And like Vi, he has a crew and they run deep. He positions himself as more than just a rival to Vi, but as someone who wants to be seen as top dog on the street. For his flavor and personality, that's one of the moments that really brought to mind how much I love Arcane, because even these minor characters have a lot of depth to them. Although he is violent in the way most of the Undercity is violent, it's presented as though it's without malice. It's just a fact of life. And to me, unlike the cool self-assuredness of Vi, most of Deckard's words carry a false bravado to them. It's as though he's playing a bad guy. His motivation is pretty straightforward. He wants power. Do you really think he and his gang wanted a taste of the treasure for that little bit of coin? Or was it set the precedent that he's the tax man? You do business, you pay him what's due. And after his humiliation at the hands of Vi, the fact that he really is after power is confirmed after the most chilling line in the series.
Power. It comes to those who will do anything to achieve it.
When talking about Silco, it's tempting to go on a rant about his sympathetic goals or his complicated arc, etc. But all of that character development is only interesting because it stands in contrast to how he was initially presented, how he was introduced. When we first meet Silco, he is given his context by having all the trappings of the master villain. He lives in a giant aquarium, he has a mad scientist on the payroll, and he has a minion who's failed him tied up to a chair. And that moment is what really inspired me to make this video. You see, we were just made to hate Deckard. We spent the last couple of scenes laughing about how Vi beat him up, but then we are shown him next to Silco, and we understand that Silco is much, much worse.
Someone just volunteered.
Every person's viciousness, their danger, their evil exists on a spectrum in relation to each other. It provides context for his villainy. Yeah, Roose Bolton is bad, but compared to Ramsey, the writers did a great job with imparting a lot of flavor to Silco too. He is painted as exceedingly cold, intelligent, smooth, the iron fist and the velvet glove. He calmly and politely explains to Deckard why he's going to kill him. And we are shown his utter ruthlessness in killing his own pet. Unlike the others, Silco's true motivation is initially obscured and it's slowly revealed throughout the story. But we do know that he wants to complete a plan. And we're given a few hints about what his immediate goals are. It has something to do with Vander, it has something to do with Shimmer, and the pressure is mounting. So those are the three basic elements Arcane uses to introduce a villain. But an introduction only matters if they're going to come back. And so this next tip is the one that's really important, especially if you're trying to build a recurring villain. How do you put your baddie in front of the players without them dying? In any game that has any sort of narrative structure, we can split the villains into two broad groups. The most common are Type 1 villains. They sit in the boss room at the end of the dungeon and wait to be killed. Not only are they super common in video games, but they're all over tabletop RPGs too. The Black Spider from Lost Mines, a Serac. Who's the baddie from Sunless Citadel? Look it up. Bellic the Outcast. In fact, most published adventures use this type of villain, and that's because it's so dangerous to use a Type 2 villain, one that is put in front of the heroes before the final showdown takes place. Strahd is famous for being a Type 2 villain because it's so hard to use them in published adventures. Because if your players act like players and jump the gun and attack the baddie, they could get lucky with a few critical hits and kill him off. And then you're gonna have to do a whole lot of work to rearrange and try to salvage that $50 hardcover, and avoiding the works the whole reason you bought the book. But for homebrew DMs, once you're building the adventure around their players, learning how to get the villain in front of the characters without the villain ending up dead is a great skill to learn. Because repeated confrontation builds the deepest animosity. And the old, "you're not worth my time to kill" trope only works once. You have to find another way. Luckily, Arcane is bursting with inspiration for how to get your baddies in front of the characters without getting them killed. Getting back to our examples, the enforcers can walk around in the darkest alleys, in the lowest parts of the Undercity, and emerge unscathed. Because everybody knows if you harm them, others will come, and make it bad for all the people of Zon, not just you. Piltover can't allow anyone to attack the enforcers of their authority and get away unscathed. It damages their ability to claim power. That's why everybody knows you don't kill a cop. Deckard and his crew give us a great example of how you can have conflict and even combat with a baddie and have them still walk away alive. Indeed, his return and subsequent death hit harder than a random goon injected with Shimmer because we've met him before. Like in the alley fight with Deckard, you as DM can use your narrative control to ensure the fight stays a non-lethal brawl, with unarmed strikes and grapples. And just as soon as Vi upped the ante by grabbing a weapon, bash! The fight's over and it transitions into a roleplay scene. Silco uses two tricks that are particularly useful for tabletop RPGs. One before and one after the time skip. After the time skip, we get the sense that Silco is untouchable, and our heroes have to go a long time before getting to confront him head on. To make up for this, and still feel like they're getting the villain in front of the heroes, they make his presence felt in other ways. Everybody talks about him, offering opinions and sharing memories. Various thugs serve as his proxies, and with Shimmer being ubiquitous, everybody understands who's getting rich from it. So that's number one, use other ways to get their presence on screen. But in the beginning, he is face to face with Vi and the gang, and yet he lives. Why? Because he has bodyguards, any one of whom possesses a significant challenge on their own to a competent fighter. And Silco's attitude shows he's not even slightly concerned, which is a good tip to telegraph to your players not to try anything desperate. Things can go horribly wrong. On that note, the most powerful method for keeping your villain alive, and perhaps the trickiest to pull off, is to have the heroes not really want them dead, or at least to feel conflicted about it. In case you haven't noticed, I've saved the best example for introducing villains for last. And don't get me started, Jinx is a villain. She is sadistic, reckless, and a merciless killer. When given the opportunity to be heroic and self-sacrifice the way Vander and Vi were willing to do, she doesn't. She consistently chooses the wrong path. And unlike Silco, who is ideologically motivated, she does it for the wrong reasons. She may be a consequence of her society, but she's still a villain. Jinx comes to us with a lot of context already provided by the first act. We know who she was, who she loved, and who she's with now. From a D&D perspective, this can be seen as a bonus for playing in an established world, with a history and lore behind it that your players are familiar with. But when we meet her in the second act, her intro scene is in media res, and we have to figure out who she is as it unfolds. And by the end of it, two things are clear. She's involved with serious organized crime, and she has a reputation. When it comes to Jinx's flavor, where to start? It's everything about her. The gadgets, the scribble art, the pigtails uncut since her sister left. And yes, the sickening grin that betrays the underlying psychosis. Right from the intro, we get a strong sense that Jinx's personality, her feelings and actions, is largely defined by her deep psychological problems. Most of what Jinx wants isn't explicitly stated in her opening sequence. Instead, we have to infer a lot of her motivation from what we, the audience, know about what Powder wants. She wants to go on missions, and Jinx gets that. She wants to have her inventions work, and Jinx gets that. She wants to be loved by Vi, and Jinx does not get that one, which leads us to her true motivation.
We will show them all.
And this harkens back to what we talked about at the very beginning of the video, that often a villain's motivation is a corrupted contrast between what they want and what they actually need. Jinx desperately believes that if Vi is by her side, if they're together again, things can go back to the way they were. But what she really needs is to accept that things have changed. And by the time she gets there, it's too late. And how does it even get to be too late? How does Jinx stay alive that whole time? It's because not all of the heroes wanted her dead. And maybe even more importantly, we as the audience, we didn't want Jinx dead. And in tabletop RPGs, your audience are the same as your players, who have agency to control the outcome. Unlike other villains whom we can sympathize with, but still not want them to get what they want, we are desperate for Jinx to come out okay, for the villain to be redeemed. But it doesn't happen. Arcane is written as a tragedy. But our games don't have to be that way. We can give the players the opportunity for them to emerge triumphantly, and then see if they rise to the challenge. Yeah, that's it. That's the video, folks. Long time coming, but I hope it was worth the wait. Before you click away, I want to urge you to check out Galder's Gazetteer, my 5e expansion for advanced players. It expands the rules with new conditions, actions, and martial options, and implements them through new subclasses, variant classes, ancestries, and a whole GM toolkit. There are also 2 one-shot adventures included to help you use this expanded material right away. If you like this video and my way of thinking about RPGs, you might want to check out my $1 Patreon, where I have interviews, design streams, and access to all my home game notes. Tons and tons of content, only $1, check it out. And of course, please don't forget to feed the algorithm by liking, subscribing, and letting me know your thoughts on this video in the comments below. Just kidding. Go ahead and tell me why you think Jinx isn't a villain.